Now, for our main speaker today, your VP of Programs, Beth Knox, will make the introduction.
Thank you, President Jeff. I appreciate that. I am very pleased to introduce today's speaker. I know that he is a familiar face to all of us. John Scholes has been with the Downtown Seattle Association for 13 years. He spent the first 6 years as VP of Advocacy and Economic Development, and then was named President and CEO in November of 2014. John firmly believes the health of downtown Seattle is critical to a healthy city and region. John has a passion for taking on big issues, and it's reflected in his nearly 20 years of work in nonprofit advocacy, local government, regional policy, and senior positions on political campaigns. At the DSA, he leads a diverse team focused on creating a healthy, vibrant, and inviting downtown. John is a member of the board of Visit Seattle, the International Downtown Association, the Transportation Choice Coalition, and the Downtown Emergency Service Center. He served on a number of city and county task forces on transportation, homelessness, and housing. John is a Puget Sound Business Journal 40 Under 40 award winner and a graduate of Leadership Tomorrow. He attended the University of Texas in Austin before graduating from the University of Washington. He lives in downtown Seattle with his wife and 9-year-old twins, Parker and Avery. In his spare time, he can be found skiing, golfing, and mountain biking in the Central Cascades. John, we really appreciate you being here today and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Beth, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation, and appreciated coming before you on occasion with the Downtown Minute to keep you updated on some of the things we're working on as an organization around downtown recovery. So I hope I'm not wearing out my welcome here, coming back to you today and speaking about the charter amendment that we're working with other organizations to bring before Seattle voters and to the ballot in November. What I hope to do in our time together today is just at a high level talk about the problem that faces us around chronic homelessness, the substance of the charter amendment and what it would do, talk about the campaign that's come together to bring it before voters and bring it to the ballot, and then how you can help. The crisis that we face on our street, I've likened to a parallel pandemic in many ways to the pandemic that we are close to vaccinating away in the form of coronavirus. When it comes to chronic homelessness, substance use, mental health challenges on our street, it really is, I think, reaching pandemic levels, and it won't go away with a vaccine. And this crisis was one that we entered this pandemic with. The pandemic in many ways has worsened it. We see more people outside today than we did a little over a year ago. Nearly 4,000 of our neighbors in parks and alleys and sidewalks unsheltered within the city of Seattle. We are spending more money today as a city on this crisis than we ever have before, more than $160 million, and we see more people outside than we ever have before. We've all witnessed the bickering and arguing and political dysfunction around this issue over the last several years. It was almost 6 years ago that the city and county declared a state of emergency around homelessness. But today we see too many of our neighbors suffering. They're disconnected from services, from housing, from counseling, from treatment that they need to come off the streets. And there really is no plan for what to do when it comes to this crisis and this harsh reality that we see throughout the city. There's no plan at City Hall that any one of us can go pull up and look at and understand the approach and the metrics that will be evaluated and reported on. What we've seen is a lot of argument and dysfunction. Now, that doesn't mean that there haven't been good folks trying and important investments and some important programs that have been expanded, nor does it mean that there are not highly capable, committed individuals and organizations in the nonprofit community doing their part to bring folks inside and serve them. There's plenty of that going on, but we lack a strategy as a city for how we are approaching the crisis of chronic homelessness. And it's a crisis that's only getting worse, and we're spending more in direct costs each and every year. not including the indirect costs as well. So that reality led our organization to come together with a number of other organizations in our city earlier this year to draft a measure to present to voters to require a new approach to chronic homelessness. And we sought input from around a dozen providers of services, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing, sought their input on the language and the approach, made a significant number of edits to our first draft, filed that charter amendment, took some additional input from some of the same organizations and leaders from the nonprofit community, and then refiled it. And it is out now on the streets for signature. It would do a few things, and I'm going to pull up just 2 slides here to highlight the substance of the measure here for you. Give me 1 second. I covered the problem here, the only other in my intro, but the only other point I would make is there's severe racial disparity around this crisis and the population that's outside today. Our Black neighbors in the city of Seattle are overrepresented in the chronic homeless population, 4 times their general population within our city. So there's significant racial disparities within this crisis that continues to worsen within the city of Seattle. So the charter amendment as drafted and as presented, and that's being circulated within our city today for signature, would do a number of things. First and foremost, it would require the city to invest in mental health and substance use treatment. We know that a majority of the folks suffering from chronic homelessness within the city of Seattle today are dealing with one or both of those issues. And our city government is not making investments directly in treatment. They've made investments in permanent supportive housing. That's where a bulk of their investment and dollars have gone over the last several years. But we are not investing in the critical services and specifically the treatment that we know so many people need to get inside and stay inside and get stabilized. This would require the city to make those investments and expand the existing systems that are out there today that the county and state are running. We're not suggesting the city needs to go set up its own behavioral health system, but they need to bring more dollars to the table to increase the capacity for treatment within the city. We also require the city to create and deploy a behavioral health rapid response capability. So individuals that are trained, mental health professionals, case managers, counselors, as an alternative to the police. Our police department is handling more than 10,000 crisis calls a year. They are the go-to entity because we as a city have not invested in individuals with the skills and capacity and the experience that is necessary to assist folks in crisis and those that are dealing with behavioral health challenges. We've relied on the police department to pick up that load. There's a better approach and we must create it and invest in it. Within the first year of adoption of the charter amendment, the language will require the city to invest in at least 2,000 new units of emergency housing and the associated services, the outreach, the counseling, other services to get people connected to that housing and remain in that housing and help them navigate job retraining, counseling, staying engaged with treatment services, and retraining and job programs as well. And then as these services and housing are made available, the language in the charter amendment requires the city to keep open and clear our parks and playgrounds, our sports field, our other public spaces, to keep those clear of encampments. And the encampments that exist today that pose an immediate public health or safety risk or obstruct access or use of public spaces can be removed. That is current city policy, and this amendment does not change that current policy. But it does change the approach that the city must take to engage and bring inside folks that are in encampments, in tents, and other public areas in our city. And at the core of this charter amendment is the goal of bringing people inside. That's what this is about. It's not about chasing them from one park to the next, or one sports field to the next sports field, or one neighborhood to the next neighborhood. In many ways, that's what we've been doing as a city. So one park is cleared and that encampment is moved, and it quickly becomes a new encampment in another park. Because we haven't been offering these services, we haven't been taking this approach. We've relied too heavily on congregate shelter, the crowded shelter with a mat on the floor that you can show up at 8 o'clock at night, stand in line, hope that you get a spot, and then 6 in the morning, you've got to clear out. You can't bring your belongings. There's no place to store your goods. You're crammed inside with hundreds of other people. That's a failed strategy. It's a strategy we've relied on too often within our city over the last several years. And I think in many ways, it's contributed to the crisis that we see. This strategy expands the set of housing alternatives that we're providing so that we're investing in single room units. We're moving away from the congregate model of crowding people into spaces that they have to depart at 6 in the morning. And we're providing them the treatment and services that are so key to getting them off and keeping them off the streets of Seattle. The charter amendment would also establish a dedicated fund in the city treasury so that the city could accept contributions from the philanthropic community, business community, and also make use of the significant amount of federal money coming to the city of Seattle this year from the recent action in DC this past spring. The city of Seattle will receive around $232 million of federal money this year, and that will carry forward into 2022. It's our opinion and perspective that a majority of those dollars should be used to implement the provisions of this charter amendment and be focused on chronic homelessness. The charter amendment requires that at least 12% of the city's general fund be allocated to human services programs, including the homelessness services and housing that's articulated and outlined in the language. Right now, the city of Seattle's current general fund budget is current human services budget is about 11% of the general fund. So this sets a floor and not a ceiling, and really sends a message that the voters of Seattle want city government to be prioritizing general fund dollars and their spending on the set of solutions and an approach that is proven to work in other cities across this country, and that we shouldn't be relying on the next tax or the last dollar in. We should really be focusing the first dollars into City Hall and the first dollars into the city coffers on this crisis, on those with the least, on those that are suffering. Our city general fund has increased more than 50% over the last 5 or 6 years as we've experienced rapid economic growth within our city, but we have not prioritized those dollars around the approaches, set of services, and temporary emergency housing that we know is so critical to getting folks inside. And then finally, the amendment would sunset in 6 years in December of 2027. And the language and the structure of the amendment itself really reaffirms the significance and importance of the Regional Homelessness Authority that was established by the city and county approximately 2 years ago and is currently being stood up with a new CEO. So the city would be directed to contract with that homelessness authority that has responsibility for managing homelessness services across King County. So where appropriate, where that authority is best positioned to provide these services, the city would be required to contract with them and support their work and their objectives. We in no way are questioning the importance or the approach and the work that went into establishing that authority, but recognizing through this charter amendment the significant crisis that Seattle faces today. And the Regional Homelessness Authority today, I believe, has 2 staff. They continue to do good work to get their legs underneath them, but they are not equipped at this time to deal with this crisis that we see throughout our city. So that, in essence, is the substance of this amendment and what it would do. As I noted, we are currently gathering signatures. A campaign has come together to promote and help pass this measure. We have until about the end of June to collect 33,060 signatures of registered voters within the city of Seattle and submit them to the city clerk for validation. And then the city council is required to place this on the ballot, and it would go on the November ballot. The Seattle Chamber, Visit Seattle, a number of other organizations, along with the Downtown Seattle Association, have come together to promote and put forward this charter amendment. And we've taken really important and helpful and instructive input from more than a dozen nonprofit housing and service providers, from Plymouth Housing and the Downtown Emergency Service Center, the United Way of King County, and many others. There's a couple ways that you can help. One, you can donate directly to the campaign by going to compassionseattle.org. You can sign a petition in person. Petition gatherers are out at grocery stores and other areas throughout the city of Seattle 7 days a week. You can go to compassionseattle.org and download a petition yourself and sign that petition, circulate it among your neighbors and colleagues if they're registered voters in the city, and then mail it back or drop it off at the campaign office, which is located on Olive between 7th and 6th Avenues in downtown in the ground floor of the Tower building. And you can also email your networks and post on social media and share the website to Compassion Seattle and encourage your colleagues, neighbors, family, and friends to take action as well to sign this initiative. So I see the chat box full of a number of questions, and so I will leave my comments there and look forward to engaging in conversation and responding to some of the questions that are put forward here in the chat. But thanks again for the opportunity to be with you and review this important effort.
Thank you, John. Awesome, as always, to see you. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. I am going to start off with a question of my own. Do you find this to be a bipartisan effort? Do you feel like there's a buzz on both sides of society?
I don't think this is a partisan issue. I think we're all frustrated by the reality of what we see on the streets of people suffering. And we know that this, from the polling that we've done, this is the top issue on the minds of voters. They're frustrated, they're concerned. This issue rises above all others right now. And I think they're frustrated by the dysfunction, the lack of action, and really having no plan or alignment. You know, if you look at how we combated this pandemic over the last year, I think in many ways it's exactly how we need to address this issue of homelessness, which this charter amendment would require. We accepted the crisis and the reality of the crisis. We partnered together, business community, nonprofit, the public sector, and government. We had clear dashboards so that we could see whether we're making progress in combating the coronavirus, if we're making progress with vaccinations. We adjusted our strategy to account for rises and decreases in hospitalizations and other things. We need to take the similar approach, the same sense of urgency and same sense of emergency action on this. So I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think we're all frustrated and we see too many people suffering that we want to see helped.
Yeah, good. How many people are living in homeless encampments within the city limits of Seattle?
We know that more than 4,000 people are unsheltered within the city. The percent that are in tents themselves, we don't have a good handle on that. There's more than 600 tent encampments throughout the city. Don't have a good sense of how many people are living in each of those tents, but we know there are more tents in our city today than there were a year ago. There are more tents in downtown Seattle than there were a year ago. There are 22 tents on 3rd Avenue right now at 3rd and Pike in front of the Wild Ginger and Triple Door, which is trying to reopen its doors in 2 weeks and invite customers and workers back. So we have a crisis that has only worsened during this pandemic.
Yeah. How come I don't see the same thing in Bellevue or the East Side? There are tents on the sidewalks now. You just mentioned that. How come we don't really see this on the East Side?
We do see homeless individuals throughout our region. It presents itself in different ways, perhaps more hidden, perhaps in vehicles in certain cases, or folks couch surfing. But across King County, we have more than 12,000 folks who are homeless. But we do have a higher percentage of the unsheltered population within the city of Seattle. There's no doubt about that. And it's one of the reasons that we've proposed this charter amendment. We need to attack this issue at a regional level, but right now we have an outsized share of the challenge within the city limits of Seattle. And we believe that the city needs to respond accordingly.
Yeah, okay. How is the behavioral rapid response different than the existing crisis response team that is a co-responder model, and would it be a 24-hour response?
Yes, it would, and it would not involve and be really reliant on the police department, which is in many ways how we've sort of compensated for lack of investment in individuals in a system and function that is necessary to really effectively respond to people in crisis. We've asked our police department to do that. They've improved their ability to do that over the last several years, and certainly under the consent decree. But it's a necessary but not sufficient response. So this would require the city to develop, fund, invest, and scale a response with the folks who are trained and equipped and have the experience to meet people before they're in crisis, before they're screaming at the light pole on the corner of 4th and Pike or where have you within our city.
Do you propose redirecting the current $160 million that is spent on or added to new taxes? Given the severity of homeless problem, exactly how is the current money being spent?
I think it should be spent along the lines of what this charter amendment requires should this pass. And that's really what this is about, is forcing through a political mandate by voters an approach and a plan and a strategy that we've lacked. And so that general fund dollars and dollars coming in from the federal government, state, philanthropic community, the business community are all then pointed in the direction of executing on this plan and then requiring, as this charter amendment does, reporting to the public on progress. So every 3 months, a report must be published based on the language of the charter that then is made public. For all of us to see, and so that then we can adjust course as necessary. So the dollars that are being spent around this issue ought to be spent in ways consistent with this charter amendment to bring people inside and off the streets.
What will be what will be done with the homeless people who are not from Seattle?
It's generally a small portion of the folks outside, but we want to bring them inside because we've been chasing them from one park to the next over the last several years, and that really hasn't worked for anybody. So most of the folks that are homeless within King County became homeless in King County. Certainly there's a share coming from other parts of the country, but that's a pretty small number when you look at who's coming from other states. But certainly there are folks coming from Auburn or from Kent or from Bellevue, because those cities lack services and they lack the level of temporary and permanent supportive housing that the city of Seattle has stepped up to provide. But they're here today in our parks, on our sidewalks. That's our reality. I think we need to accept that and do everything we can to bring them inside.
How do you know they're from different areas outside of Seattle?
The one night count that is conducted in January of each year and required by the federal government is the data source for that, where volunteers are going out throughout the county to track the level of people that are unsheltered and also in some cases ascertain where they're from. There's other surveys that are done. The city of Seattle 2 or 3 years ago conducted its own survey as well, engaging folks that are on the street, understanding what led to their homelessness, what was their last address or community they lived in before becoming homeless.
Okay. In this era of income inequality, can you speak to the effort on Seattle when suburban communities forbid homelessness? Does it squeeze more people into the city?
Yeah, I think some of the strategies that certain cities are embracing of, not investing in the services and treatment and simply sort of chasing people out of their parks certainly does put more pressure on the city. I mean, I think as a region, we need to accept that we have a significant population of people that have mental health and substance use disorder, others that have become homeless for other reasons or outside for other reasons. And collectively, we need to invest in a strategy, the set of services and housing to bring them inside. Chasing them from one park or one city or jurisdiction to another, I don't think is the compassionate approach, not an effective one either. I think we need to do more to certainly expand the supply of housing across our region and across the city, but also be smart about how we're approaching this crisis and the emergency that we face right now. we've put a lot of focus on investment in permanent supportive housing, and we're building more and investing more than ever before. That's really important. We need to continue to do that. It takes several years to build those units, and they cost $300,000 to $400,000 a piece to construct. Just as we invested and put a lot of effort into development of a vaccine, while at the same time wearing masks and social distancing and combating this pandemic in many other ways, we need to adopt a parallel strategy to the investments in permanent supportive housing by investing in temporary emergency housing that's cheaper, faster to build, and by investing in the treatment services that we know are so important to getting people off the street and keeping them off the street. That's really what this charter amendment requires, is that emergency response, so that we're not telling the 4,000 people that are outside today that they've got to wait another 4 years before we can get them keys to a permanent unit.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right, so this is kind of a pickup on that last statement that you said. Do you see any opportunity in the hotels which are currently being used being made a major part of the approach to housing first?
I do, and it's an area where the county under Dow Constantine's leadership has led to look at where can we acquire existing hotels or assisted living facilities from the private market to make available. And we've seen great results and outcomes from the folks that have been moved from congregate shelters, those crowded 200 to 300 person facilities, to having their own room and their own bathroom and their own shower. University of Washington did a study on the Red Lion in Renton that the Downtown Emergency Service Center has been operating since about a year ago, and has found great results and outcomes in the folks that have been living in that facility relative to their performance in a congregate shelter. So I think we need to look at all options, from tiny homes to acquiring existing apartment buildings, acquiring existing hotels, assisted living facilities, to stand up more units for the people outside. We need to move with greater sense of urgency than we have to date.
Yeah. The city charter is our city's constitution. Putting a sunset clause on the charter is most unusual from a legal standpoint. Why not fashion this as an initiative? In addition, doesn't the need for balancing the needs of the homeless before clearing the sidewalks open the city to litigation regarding the oh my God, John Bridge, I swear.
I think I know where John's going.
I can't say that word. You go for it.
So the first part of that question, the charter is our city's constitution. It's a serious document. I think this is a serious issue. It's costing us hundreds of millions of dollars a year in direct cost and indirect cost. I think it threatens the recovery of downtown and other neighborhoods. It threatens the reopening of our arts and cultural institutions and small businesses. So I don't think there's a better vehicle than the charter for the people of Seattle to say, this is the approach that we expect our city government to take when it comes to this crisis, this emergency, and the people that are suffering outside. And we didn't go the direction of an initiative, because an initiative can be changed after 2 years by the city council. The city council cannot change a charter amendment without first presenting it back to the voters of Seattle. So this is about the voters, I think, having their say on this issue. For the last 20 years, the politicians and elected officials have had their opportunity to solve this issue, to demonstrate progress, to demonstrate cohesion and consensus and alignment. We haven't seen that. So we believe this is an opportunity for the people of Seattle to have their say, and that's why we're pursuing this amendment. This amendment does require the city to take a different approach to John's second question than what they've been taking, because the current approach hasn't worked. This idea that we can offer somebody a mat on the floor in a crowded shelter that they may not be able to spend the next night in is a failed strategy. We put too many eggs in that basket. So and we haven't offered treatment along with that either. So this does require a different level of investment and a different approach, a different set of services, and a different type of housing that's offered. And it's based on models that we've seen work in other cities. Community Solutions, a nonprofit out of Washington, D.C., is working in over 80 cities across the United States, big cities and small cities, and demonstrating progress by doing just what we are bringing forward to voters. And we've seen on a smaller scale within the city of Seattle, this model show progress. The Just Care program that was created and stood up with some federal dollars here within downtown has moved more than 150 people off the sidewalks in Pioneer Square in the International District by doing exactly what this charter amendment requires. So this does require a different approach. I think that's good and necessary because the current one's not working.
Who's the decision maker on all this? Who needs to sign off on what it is that you're proposing?
The voters of Seattle. If this qualifies for the November ballot, if we get the required number of signatures, voters will have their opportunity to approve or reject this amendment to the charter.
All right. I understand that the DSA is interested in getting people off the streets. That makes sense from a business perspective. However, the chronic adult population only represents 16% of people experiencing homelessness in Seattle. How will spending the majority of funding on the 16% impact the 84% who are less visible but equally impacted by homelessness?
The charter amendment doesn't distinguish between those who are chronically homeless or homeless. You look at the 2,000 units that are required to be produced, those will be available to folks who are unsheltered. They may be chronically homeless, they may not be. We certainly have a challenge and a crisis on our hands when it comes to those who are chronically homeless and people that continue to return to homelessness, and specifically people that have behavioral health challenges, substance use disorder, and mental health. That is a big part of our crisis and the impact that we see, the costs direct and indirect to a host of systems, the criminal justice system, our emergency services system. So we do think we need a different strategy there. We need to prioritize that population because of their vulnerability and because of the impact and costs that they're having within our community and within our city. But the set of investments, both the housing and services called for in the charter amendment, are not exclusive to the chronic homeless population.
Okay, I got a couple minutes left. Does the 12% requirement include general fund money that could be needed for debt service for capital investment in housing, so as opposed to annual operating expenses?
It doesn't touch the housing levy, which is supported by property taxes, which was doubled in 2016, which is used to fund largely capital development and development of low-income housing. So the city is for the most part leveraging those dollars for capital expenses and not operating. But again, this is really about the city, requiring the city to set priorities on spending on this crisis. I think for too long, we and the people suffering outside have heard the message from City Hall that we're one tax away from helping you and bringing you inside. If we only had one more tax, if we only had another dollar. And we've told the people that are outside suffering that you get the last dollar in, not the first. And this has occurred during the greatest economic expansion in this city's history. We've never had a general fund bigger than we do today. And we've never had more than $200 million of federal funding coming to the city of Seattle and more than $600 million coming to King County. So money's never been the problem here. Setting priorities has been, and a lack of a plan has been the problem.
It's interesting. We've heard that before from other guests to Rotary. It's never about the money. We've got the money. So what do you do with it, right? And finally doing something with it. I got room for at least 1.5 more questions. I don't know what the half's going to be. You said earlier that you're out in the streets collecting signatures. Can you collect signatures electronically?
Unfortunately, you cannot. Washington state law requires a wet ink signature. So you can download the petition from compassionseattle.org and sign it. And there's spots for you to get your neighbors and family and friends to also sign. And then you need to return it to the campaign office, either mail it or bring it in.
Wet ink, so no pencils. All right, okay.
Wet ink.
30 seconds for this last one. What is the current reaction of members of the city council to what it is that you're working on?
Well, I'd hope that they would embrace the provisions and what's called for right now. There's nothing stopping them from implementing the language and the programs that are outlined in this measure. So I haven't paid too close attention to who's taking what position on the measure itself. But what I would hope is that our elected leaders would review it and begin to implement it, not wait for voters to adopt it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to speak on all of us. This is awesome what you're doing. Keep it up. Keep it moving forward. Thanks for bringing this to our attention today. I know you've always got the 2 minutes, but this is pretty interesting stuff. So keep it up. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. All right. This quick shout out to our very good gold sponsor friend, our good friend, waiting for a slide, good friend. Here we go. Bob Alexander. Without his help, as you hear me say every week, without his help and those that sponsor our club, we would not be able to share conversations like today with John through our very own YouTube channel. So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, get hold of Caroline and she will hook you up.